I'd like to do a quick poll. How many of you like ice cream? It's a fair amount of us. Hey, tonight we're having an ice cream social, and I want to invite you to come join us. So Sundays on Sunday, or Sunday Fun Day, or whatever you want to call it. And again, the idea is like, hey, let's come out and hang out with some of the other people at church. Believe it or not, whenever 200 people walk through the doors on a Sunday morning, it's really hard to get to know everybody. You can have some pretty shallow conversations, maybe a hi, and if you're lucky, remember somebody's name. But tonight, whether you're new and you want to meet some people, or you've been coming for a while and you want to hang out with friends, or you just want free ice cream, whatever the case might be, that's tonight at 7 o'clock. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, like, how many of you remember, like to play, or excited by the idea of hide and seek? Yeah, so probably a lot of us have some childhood memories, maybe some childhood trauma associated with hide and seek. It could be. Right, but in a conversation recently with some other people from church, we were talking about how come these games, like we don't play them as adults? Like, that would be so much fun. And I remember a lot of things about hide and seek, but one of my favorite memories, just getting together with my cousins. I come from a big family. We would always dress in really dark clothes, preferably black, sometimes camo, because camo's cool. And we would get together at night because hide and seek is best at night. And then we'd go hide in the cracks and the crevices. I was always looking for a shadow, a ditch, someplace to lay in, that even if somebody were to walk right past me, they couldn't see me because of the lighting. And those are awesome, awesome memories. And as an adult, I had a chance to do something similar to that. A camp I was working with in Minnesota did this faculty staff scavenger hunt. So the idea is that all of the faculty and staff would go hide, and then the campers would try to come find us. I don't know who thought this was a good idea to let the kids run amok while the teachers all run and hide. But we survived. And there was a couple of times, same type of deal, like dark clothes, in the shadows, like almost getting my head stepped on by some kids who were like loud and talking like right next to me. Another time, worst time. So up alongside of the lake, it would kind of wash out when the water was high, but the water was low. So I stepped off of the edge into the edge of the lake, and I'm just kind of tucked down. There's a little bit of grass kind of coming over my head. Like, I have just won the prize. Like, you don't even have to hunt. Like, they are not going to find me here. What found me there was chiggers. And I'm like, don't say anything, don't say anything. You're going to win, because I'm driven, I'm competitive. Like, don't say anything. But the chiggers continued to remind me I was a loser for the next several weeks. Right? They were the real deal. Hide and seek is one of those things, like, we associate it with kids and playing games, but I think that hiding is something that we continue to do. Think about this for a moment. Now, as adults, it's usually because there's something in our past, there's some mistake that we've made, there's some trauma that's happened to us, maybe something in our life, like, it just doesn't measure up, and so we just run away and try to find a place to hide. It can be as simple as, I just want to bury my beak in the sand and pretend like nobody else is in existence. And we do that through things like, endless, mindless scrolling. We hop on a series on our TV, but there's addictions, there's entertainment. We climb the ladders of success and achievement and financial gain. And all of these things, in some way, shape, or form, we're hoping that we can find validation. Maybe we're hoping that we can, on the outside, at least look like we've got it together, because on the inside, we don't really feel like we measure up. And there's so many different things that could be. Like, as I'm looking at a room this size, I don't know everybody's past. And if I do know your past, I don't know that much about it. Right? I don't know how your parents raised you or didn't raise you, if you were with your parents, not with your parents, if you have kids, how that's going. I don't know if the faith that you proclaim on the outside is the faith that's being lived out day to day when you're in your home life. I don't know the financial situations you're in, but all of this stuff, right, it just adds up and it continues to ripple in our life. And a lot of times we just want to run and hide. We don't want anybody else to know that we're struggling, that we're in pain, that we're hurting. And I think that there's a guy if you haven't figured it out by now, those of you who have been with us through this series, in David that kind of relates to some of our pain. David takes it to a different level, though. King David wrote at least half the Psalms, right? And in his confessions, more often than not, he kind of gets to this like, I'm stuck. God, can you help me? I'm stuck. God, can you help me? If you just stop it there and you're like, okay, what do the Psalms mean? Like, this is kind of the repetition, the repeat that is going through much of the Psalms. Now, there are some laments, like some why are things so bad? There's some prayers, there's some praises going on. Definitely some of them put to music, so there's some energy behind it, but much and much the same. And I think that you and I deal with it generations later, individually, week after week, month after month. God, I'm stuck. Can you help me? One of the things we also find in David is this reassurance of faith. That God, you are still God. You've provided before, and you'll provide again. And that's a piece that we all really need to hear. God, you are still God. You are in control. You've helped me before, and you'll help me again. Right? Those are faith-building moments. But before we dive into Psalm chapter 142, I want to take us to 1 Samuel. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, so if you're trying to open up your Bible and follow along, good luck. But I encourage you to go through and read this on your own. So 1 Samuel 16, and we're going through 24. And we're talking about the life of David. So David was a young boy, young of many siblings. If you remember when Samuel was coming to anoint a new king, he's stepping into the house and he's expecting to find this guy that just is there, is present. And he goes through every single one of the siblings and gets through them all and goes, nah. These guys, they're not it. Is there another? And so they pull little David out of the field where he's tending to the sheep. Now, we don't know how old he is. Some say maybe around 12 years of age. But he is brought in. He is anointed the next king of Israel, but not yet. And I think that's something that you and I can oftentimes relate with as well. Maybe not so much being the shepherd or being anointed king. Those are kind of different animals, but how many of us have ever experienced a yes, but not yet in your life? Yes, you can do this. Yes, I want you for this, but not yet. Anybody else besides me wrestle with patience in those moments of the not yet moments of life? So I think we can relate. That David is king, but not yet. And then the king, Saul, who has not been living up to his calling, is struggling. And so he asks for a musician to be brought in because we didn't have Spotify or Apple Music. And so they bring in the musician who happens to be who? David. And David plays this stringed instrument known as a lyre. And as he's doing so, it calms the king's anxiety and his nerves and the evil spirits that are haunting him. Right? So he has this opportunity. It's building. It's progressing. Sometimes we're on this journey like, oh, I got this great idea, this great opportunity. This thing is going to happen. And we take the next step and we're like one step closer. This is great. This is grand. This is definitely going to happen. And then he gets this amazingly weird opportunity that all of us know about, even if we don't know the Bible. And so the king is out battling the Philistines, he and the rest of the Israelites. His brothers are engaged in the army. And across the valley, or the Philistines, a behemoth of a guy known as Goliath is just constantly trash-talking the Israelites. And what they're trying to do is go mano a mano. Instead of going all-out war and losing so many lives, let's take your best and our best, and the winner gets to win. And David, this young boy, a shepherd, takes down Goliath, 9 foot tall, sling and a rock, lops off his head with his sword. Amazing story of mighty victory. And this is David. And I'm just thinking, like, the amount of times that you and I go through these moments where it builds like that. I'm going to be the next king. All right, I'm in the presence of the king. Oh, I just won this battle for everybody. Sometimes we get a little bit cocky and arrogant in those moments, I think. Begin to think nothing could go wrong. I'm on the trajectory to the thing that I want to accomplish. Well, and David then is put in charge of other military armies, and he goes out and he wins the battles. And as oftentimes would happen with a military leader, like the king would come back after defeating the Philistines, and everybody would throw a parade, and it would be an amazing feat. But when David would come back, the chant would go out, Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his tens of thousands. So inside of the heart of an already distant and struggling king builds rage and hatred and jealousy towards this young man who was brought in to calm him down. And that calm music is no longer calm because every time David steps in and strums his lyre, David is just stirring inside of himself. You ever have those little nagging feelings in your life? Where you're going through something. It's like it's not even that big of a deal, but you just kept thinking about it. And thinking about it. And the more you think about it, the more irate that you get. The more that you're like, I don't want to let them have a piece of my mind. And you're kind of stirring. Well, Saul had that, only he also had a spear. And so he would chuck it at David. I mean, doesn't that sound like a pleasant work environment? I'm here against my will for a guy who doesn't want me to be here, and he's trying to kill me. Not exactly. It's a great place to be. Saul didn't just do that. If you read through, I think it's 1 Samuel chapter 18. So Saul decides to have an arranged marriage for David with his daughter. But there's a price. There's a price to marry his daughter, and that price is 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Okay, so if you don't know what that is, it's going to make pleasant lunch conversation later. You're welcome. So the idea is basically, you're going to go out there and fight against the enemy, and you're going to take down a lot of them, and you're probably going to die in the process. Good luck, buddy. Peace out. I mean, it's really what he's setting him up for. David doesn't lose. He comes back with 200 foreskins. And he now gets to marry the daughter of the king. You would think, like, gosh, of all this stuff, dude, David. And then he pens this psalm in 142. Now, we don't know exactly if it's this moment, but I think that the odds are probably pretty good because it says that this was written by David when he was in a cave. If we read on in that story, David, who's the anointed king but not yet, David, who should be wearing a crown, is now hiding in a cave. He's running away, haunted by this king. And there he utters these words, "With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him." I've had an opportunity to go to a few caves. And in those opportunities, some really cool things have happened. Right? Just being able to see and experience and feel, but it's dark, it's dingy, it's just not a pleasant place in a lot of ways. There's bats and stuff that bats leave, and cracks and crevices, and I think whoever decided to explore this the first time, and this is probably strong language, they're an idiot. Like, why in the world would you take a little light and go into this big cave and see if you can fit through these cracks and crevices and see what's on the other side? I don't know how you feel about that. I feel like, no. Why? But I can also appreciate that inside of that cave, you can find some amazing shelter from the storms that rage around you. And if I were wanting to hide from an enemy, man, a cave would be a really good place to do that. Because again, I could just peel back away around some corner in some dark place, and they're never going to see me. And this place of refuge that David ran to could have easily been the end. Right? It could have been the end of his life, but it definitely wasn't his answer. What we see in Psalm 142 is a David who runs to the cave for refuge, but he doesn't stop running there. He runs also to God. And a refrain that's repeated in this chapter is, "I cry out to the Lord." And the question really is, do we allow our problems to push us into the presence of God? And when we do that, it begins to change our perspective on how we see things. And so as we read on, we hear from David, when my spirit faints within me, you know my way. Remember, I told you that he comes back to the promises and the provisions of God. It's not just the desperation. It's not just the problems. He remembers when God was there. You know the way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. In my mind, I'm thinking Indiana Jones, right? They're running through the temple, and there are all sorts of traps laid out, and he has nowhere to turn. He doesn't know where it's safe, but God does. And so, God, you know the path that I need to take. Does it ever feel like in your life that there are traps set before you, and if I step here, it's certain destruction. If I step over here, there's going to be pain. And it just seems like no matter what I do, it's a mistake. And no matter what choice I take, there's consequences, and I don't really want to step into that. And there is a God who knows the way. Again, he says, look to the right and see, there is no one who takes notice of me. No refuge remains for me. No one cares for my soul. In desperation, we oftentimes get to these moments, whether physically or just emotionally, mentally. And I'm running, I'm hiding, I'm striving, like everybody is against me and there's no place to go, and I run to this cave and what's next? Where do I go next? What do I do? How do I get out of here? I don't know what's safe. I don't know who I can trust. And what I know is I'm alone. And maybe physically, but more often than not, it's an emotional state of being, isn't it? Where we're going through all of this stuff and we feel like nobody gets it. Nobody understands it. No matter who I would talk to, like they're all just going to think I'm an idiot, that I'm not good enough. And I already feel insignificant. I already feel insecure. And man, this is a moment of desperation. And so a question that I think is worth asking is, where do you and I run when we feel unsafe, unwanted, or unworthy? Where is it that you and I run when we feel unsafe, unwanted, or unworthy? I mean, David's running to the cave. What's your cave? Maybe you have that man cave, that she shed, and you're constantly running there. Maybe it's the shop. Maybe it's to the local watering hole. Maybe it's to a tech device. Maybe it's to some toxic relationship. Maybe it's to an addiction of some sort. But we all have those places that we tend to run to when things get challenging, when we feel unworthy. So David is saying there's no refuge. I run there, but I can't escape it. It's kind of like we talked about a few weeks ago. Like I turn off the light at night and I lay in my bed, but my thoughts don't run away. Like they just continue to run through my head, and I'm kind of lost in this misery, and there's no refuge. Like I can't just sleep and be done with it. I can't just go on to the next day because the challenges chase me. And every time I get together with my family, some of that drama from the past seems to surface in the present. The relationship that I put my hope in is falling apart before my eyes. And then he says again, I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge. Hear this. He's in the cave, hiding, but the cave is not his refuge. In the cave, he's paused long enough to remember that he's got a refuge in a bigger rock, in a God who has done it before, who knows the way, right? He's not alone. And he's able to say this. And this is where I want us to sit for a moment as we sit in these two Psalms, 142 and 143. We've all been in despair. We've all gone through distress. We've all run from our past or present failures, right? And we've all run to something, someone, somewhere. But are we bringing it to God? Because when we can bring our problems to God, it changes our perspective. And that perspective means a world of difference. Attend to my cry, right? Because you're my refuge. Hear me. Because you're my refuge, deliver me from my persecutors. Because you're my refuge, verse 7, bring me out of prison. Right? What's his prison? I mean, his prison is the king that's chasing him. His prison maybe is that he's never going to add up. I mean, he's just a little shepherd boy. Maybe his prison is that not yet is never going to get here. What's your prison? What thoughts are locking you away? What person has said something about you, put you down, locked you away? And maybe the very thing that you're running to for refuge, for comfort, to numb the pain, to move on, is a thing like this cave that's a shelter but could easily become a prison because he could get locked away there. Always afraid to come out. Always afraid when someone could come in. And maybe that's where you are. But I want you to see the faith that David has, that God is his refuge, again and again. On in verse 7, the righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. Right? I'm alone. No one gets me. No one understands me. When am I ever going to break free of this? And now in faith, his perspective has changed. He's given it to God in prayer, and he says, you're my refuge. And now I know that there are righteous people around me. And it's not just them, that you're going to deal bountifully with me. If we continue on in the next section, you'd see these words, hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my pleas for mercy. In your faithfulness, answer me. In your righteousness. Sometimes we can get caught into this thought that God doesn't care about me, that I'm not good enough, that I haven't done enough, right? That I've done these things, and maybe they are really stupid things, because oftentimes, if you're like me, you do dumb things. And you don't just do dumb things once. You're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to change my life. Never mind, I'm going to do that dumb thing again. And in those moments where we've continued to deny God and to submit to him, right? And we feel like there is no way I can come before God because I'm such a screw up, because I keep messing it up. And I want you to hear what David is saying here. Hear my prayer because of your faithfulness. It's not ours, it's his. In your righteousness, not ours. Somebody here needs to know that they don't have to put it all together to receive the grace and provision of God. Somebody here needs to know that regardless of what screw-ups they feel like they are, or that somebody else has said of them that they are, that there is a God who meets you where you are. In the crack, in the crevice, in the cave where you've been running and hiding, in the sand where you've been sticking your head, there's a God who wants to reach in and be your refuge in that moment, in that place, and I dare say in this place right now. No one living is righteous before you. Because there's none of us. None of us are good enough. None of us deserve it. But we don't have to, because we have a God who is. Amen? Verse 5. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all the things that you've done. I ponder the work of your hands. This is David pausing in the midst of his problems to remember his provider. And this is such a powerful piece for us. Right? We're in the midst of everything going on and all the challenges that we're facing. We can look back and we can go, God was faithful before. And God did this before. And even when I thought that he wasn't there, he was, and this is how. And we can begin to list those out. But guess what? Your life can't move forward on other people's victories as much as they can on your own. So what's your story? Where's God provided for you? Where's He come through? Because if you can take your eyes off of the problem that you're stuck in and go back to the deliverance that you've already experienced in God, then you can move forward in the victory that He's promised you. Hopefully that makes sense. That little bit of perspective and a whole lot of prayer makes a huge difference in the way that we live our life. I mean, we all have a story. So what's yours? What's your story of hurt, of brokenness, of hatred, of loneliness? Right? I can share with you mine to give you a little nuance. It's not near as exciting as David's, but I feel like it kind of wrecked me. And maybe your story feels like it's wrecking you. Right? I grew up in a small town. Smallest county in the state of Missouri, poorest county in the state of Missouri. If you've been here for a while, you've heard me say, like, food stamps, government commodities, yep, that was the life. That's the way we did things. Raised by a single mom. Not in church. God, through His providence, led me to some amazing people. And I started to get plugged into a church family that cared. And they saw things in me that I did not see in myself. And that insecurity that I held as that young boy still continues to ring out in my life, not as strongly as it once did. Right, but I remember going to Bible college and Bible college entry exam and let's see what you know. And I'm like, gosh, I don't know enough to even go to Bible college. I'm going to fail this thing. This is going to be bad. But they took me in anyway. Right there with a bunch of other preachers, like preachers' kids and people who had been raised in the church. And here I am, this misfit, stuck in this. Went on to ministry and kind of felt some of the same way. Like I remember when I went in for a job interview and the pastor said, hey, we've got this candidate here today. I'm going to ask him to come up and pray. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't know anything. What do you want me to do that for? Like it felt really targeted in that moment. I made lots of stupid mistakes. The first big event I did is like, hey, let's have a concert and we're going to invite lots of the community here and I know some friends and they're all going to come support and we spent lots of money and nobody showed up. I'm like, oh, winner. I remember getting an opportunity to preach and if you don't know this about me, like sometimes I just act without really thinking things through and I just kind of push things on. And I'm not afraid of taking a risk. And so in the church that we were in, they had a table up front, and it was higher than the stage, like if it were sitting here. And it says something on the front of it like, do this in remembrance of me. And there's some trays stacked upon it. And that's how you would do communion in the established church. And there was something about that we kind of wanted to be able to shift that to the back of the room. And a lot of the other leaders in the church were talking about it. And I'm like, let's not talk about it. I'll just do it. Right? There's some people who don't like you just doing things. And some animosity gets raised when you move Jesus to the back of the room, figuratively. Right? And then on top of that, in my youthful arrogance, I said something about that caused a little ruffle of the feathers, and somebody actually stood up while I'm getting ready to preach to point out my faults. So the church I'm leading is now really uncomfortable. I've been through some things, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I'm not even getting into a lot of the stupid things I've done to myself. Right? And there's so much like that we come through, and the question remains, what's your story? Where do you run to for refuge when you're feeling unwanted, unworthy? So you can run to Jesus. And that's my hope here. And we're in the Old Testament. You don't really see Jesus so much in the Old Testament, but I think you do. And I want to try to point that out. Before we get there, let's kind of hit some high points in 143. Because the perspective changes to the provider and not the problem, we see a number of prayers lifted up by David. And these, I hope, are prayers that we bring to the table as well. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you've done. I ponder the work of your hands, right? You've been faithful before. You'll be faithful again. Now hear this. Answer me quickly. Lead me to hear in the morning of your steadfast love. God, speak to me. Wash your love over me. Deliver me from my enemies. Teach me to do your will. Let your good Spirit lead me. Preserve my life. When you take on God as the one true King, then that means you and I step into a place of submissiveness before that King. And we ask Him to lead, not just to save. Right? We ask Him what we should do with our life. And guys, this is the call of the believer today. And it's not simply to attend a church service, and I don't care if you attend every week. If your life is not being changed into the image of Christ, you're not on the right path, right? And you need to ask God to lead you on that journey. There's a lot of stuff in here that's very countercultural to the way our society lives today. And He will shape and form you mentally, physically, through your being if you'll submit to Him. But you can do that because He's provided before, and He'll provide again. When you're stuck and you're struggling, He wants to step in and provide some hope and healing. And in verse 12, and in your steadfast love, you will cut off my enemies. Not me, Him, because He loves. You will destroy all the adversaries. You will, not me. Why? Because I am your servant. I'm putting myself in a proper position before the King. I'm taking refuge in the rock. And Jesus stepped down out of heaven several years after this and took on the form of a man. He didn't have to, but He did. To empathize with us and our pain, our suffering, and our hurt. He had several people reject Him, turn their back on Him, spit on Him, crucify Him, beat Him, stick Him up on a cross. All of trying to suck the life right out of Him. And I believe more than David, right? There's a greater David in Jesus who gets your pain. And He wants you to bring the pain before Him. And take a look at all the things that He's done. And remember that you serve a Jesus that wasn't stuck in the grave, right? But He gave us a hope of new life by triumphing over that grave, and that hope remains for you and I today. And so if there's somebody here today that's like, man, I've been struggling. Like I've got my head in the sand, I'm hiding in the cracks and the crevices of this cave, and I'm trying to find all of this stuff. I want to encourage you to find your refuge in the rock that is Jesus Christ. In a Jesus that steps out of heaven to meet you where you are and raises from the grave to give you a promise of new life. Amen. That's the hope that remains for you and I. And then we just continue to follow. That's what we do because He's our Savior and He's our King. We want to honor Him. Father God, we ask that your presence be here today. We've hit some heavy stuff, at least depending on where people are. Give them the boldness to share their story. May that story just open up before you that they can confess, yes, God, I'm here, and I'm broken, and I'm hurting, and I'm feeling haunted, I'm feeling insecure and unwanted and inadequate, and I just don't know what to do, and I don't know what the next step is. Father, would you give them a faith that says, yes, you've been faithful before, you'll be faithful again. Would you help them to know that amidst the trap and the isolation and the loneliness that they're not alone and you know the way? And would you give them the posture before you to submit to your will and to your way? And may that freedom and that grace, not based upon our merit, anything that we do or haven't done, but because of your righteousness and your love for us. You've washed us clean, redeemed us, and set us free to a new way and a new life. Fathers, we pause to remember the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We also remember the hope that He gives to us in triumphing over the grave. And we remember that this Jesus is coming back again to make all things new. I pray this in His name.